Welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. So, in this episode, I really wanted to break down my spiritual journey and kind of how I got into that, to then talk about the shift that I had recently this past December when I kind of immersed myself into being curious about Christianity and faith. So, I want to break that down for you guys and really talk about my journey. And I also want to preface, I'm not here to preach to you. I'm not here to tell you to believe something that you don't believe and push things onto you. I am here to share my personal story and then also share the stories of the people that have inspired my personal journey. When COVID happened in 2020, that's when I started getting into my spiritual journey. And I want to first start off by saying that I've always been someone that's very positive. I've always had a strong work ethic. I always had strong inner knowings, but I was never a part of any religion or had any identity to what I actually believed. And in 2020, when COVID happened, that's when I watched the movie called The Secret. In this movie, they teach the law of attraction, which basically means whatever you say and think about yourself is what you guys attract. So if you're constantly thinking negative and talking bad about yourself and talking bad about other people, you're attracting that energy to you. So when you're in a high frequency and you talk to yourself nicely, positively, you start attracting things and people in your life that is on that same frequency as you. That is something I still believe, by the way, is being able to attract things that you're putting out into the world. But that's what law of attraction is. In the movie, they touched on the topic of manifestation. So being able to manifest something means that you're speaking something into existence and you say out loud or you think in your head exactly what you want to the T, and then you're able to get it. Okay, so let's pretend that you want to live in a Malibu beach house. You want to hear the waves in the living room as you're sitting on your couch. You want to smell the sea and the ocean. You want to live in a very modern place with a lot of natural light coming in. You want to have this in your kitchen. You want your bedroom to look like this. Basically, you want to get very detailed on what you want. And if you believe that it's possible for you and you actively put the action steps in to get that thing, you can get exactly what you want to the T. So that's what manifesting means. In the movie called The Secret, that's where I was introduced to that you can say exactly what you want to the T and you're able to get it. So I've always been someone, like I said, that was very positive, and being able to watch that really opened my eyes to spirituality. I haven't seen the movie in many years, but I'm pretty sure that's where they talked about journaling as well. So I started journaling and writing gratitude because you first want to practice being grateful for what you do have so God can eventually bless you with the things that you're wanting to have in your life. And I practice gratitude, I journal all my thoughts and my reflection, and then there's something I do in the journal, which is the manifesting part. So I write as if I already have the things that I'm writing about. So that's the manifesting. So you write very specific details on what you want, and then you end up getting that. Obviously, you have to put the action in. You can't just say you want something and then expect it to happen without actually putting that action in. So manifesting is still something I believe, by the way, but I kind of see it in a different way. I'm trying to stay focused because right now I'm trying to tell you about my past to then where I am right now. But at the same time, I also want to tell you guys some of the shifts I had from what I used to think versus right now. So I'm kind of trying to decide where I should tell you guys that. I never talked about this in depth. I did it once on Instagram, but it wasn't like a very long form thing. I kind of just got to the point. So I don't really know how to articulate the steps of everything. So just be patient with me, guys. But basically, I learned about manifestation, and then that's when I started doing that in my journal. So I would write very specific things. And it was crazy because in 2021 and 2022, I got exactly everything to the T of what I asked for. I didn't just ask for it, by the way. I put the action in and I believed that it was possible. Now, I believe all of this still to an extent though, because yes, I was getting every single thing that I wanted, and it was a crazy feeling being able to get exactly what I wrote to the T. And then later on in my life, like 2023, around the summertime, that's when shit kind of went downhill. And I wasn't really getting all of the things that I was asking for. And that's when I started realizing that I'm not able to manifest the same way that I used to. Everything that I was asking for, I wasn't getting. Later on, I found out that God is the person that's in control of things, right? Sometimes you desire something as a human being, but God is the only one that knows what's best for you. There's so many times in my life when I thought I desired a certain thing and it wasn't the right thing for me, and it wasn't the right path. And that's why God didn't give it to me. He knows me better, and He knows the greater good for me more than I do myself as a human. I apologize if I'm going off on little tangents, but basically I've been able to get exactly everything I wanted until it didn't end up happening. So anyway, I want to backtrack a little bit. So after I got into manifesting and started getting everything I was asking for, that's when I got super intrigued with the spirit world. So I've always been intrigued with spirits and mediumship, but I never actually knew how to get into it. So I never really cared to take those next steps. But on TikTok, I was looking up mediumship and all of that stuff related to spirits. And that's when I came across my now friend / my mentor that I hired in 2022, I believe. I joined his mentorship, and that's where he taught spirit communication. He teaches you how to connect with past loved ones, and then you also learn how to read people's energy fields. So it's literally the same thing that people do in Christianity, where they call it a prophet or prophecy, where you're praying over someone and God gives you all of these messages for the person that you're praying over. It's literally the same thing, except they call it something different. As long as your intention is right, that's all that matters. In 2022 to 2023, that's when I learned how to do mediumship. So I was able to read people in the class and be able to get very specific evidence about their past loved one that was undeniable. Very specific scenes that I was able to see and tell them. In the mentorship, we were taught to give all of the evidence first and be able to give the full reading. And then at the end is when we have the person talk to us and ask us any questions about their past loved one and to confirm some things. So we say everything head on. So like I mentioned before, this was all in 2022 to 2023. And around this time when I was doing the mediumship, I got very heavily into the full moon, the new moon. So basically the moon phases and learning about all of that. And then I also learned about birth charts. So getting very deep into astrology. I started watching TikToks and I didn't really know much about astrology. I literally just knew everything that everyone else knows, which is knowing the basic zodiac, which is your sun sign. But I didn't know how deep down and crazy accurate it is when you actually get into it. In order to find out your birth chart, you have to know exactly what time you were born. After you get that time, you're able to see what your birth chart is when you go to astrocafe.com. And I went on there, I read the whole entire birth chart, detail for detail. It was literally crazy, scarily accurate to every detail about myself. And that's when I started to believe and get into the astrology. I also learned so much about the transits. So I have certain astrologers that I follow where I keep up with the transits. For example, when all of those plane crashes were happening in February, I knew that that was going to happen before it happened because the astrologers were able to predict that. This is exactly why history repeats itself and we see things come back later on in life, because astrology is real. That is something I 100% fully believe, and I'm very immersed into astrology, even though I am seeking and learning things about Christianity, which we'll get into in a little bit. So that's how I got into astrology. I want to give you guys an example of something that happened in astrology that's going to help you open your eyes to why I believe in astrology, at least, even if you guys don't believe in it. We're having such a huge shift in the collective recently. So the past 15 to 20 years, Pluto was in the sign Capricorn. Capricorn is all about flaunting your wealth, your fame, materialistic things. So that's why we saw the Kardashians come up around that time. And that's also why on Instagram, everyone would flaunt their stuff. They would flaunt the fame, flaunt the money. Everyone idolized celebrities. And now we have Pluto in Aquarius. It was in Capricorn for 20 years. And this past November, it shifted into Aquarius. So Aquarius energy is all about technology, innovation, not being conventional, so very unconventional. That's why you're seeing Hollywood and all of these big people getting torn down and exposed. And that's why you see normal, average people climbing to the top and starting to get recognition. Nowadays, you can make anything a business. The most unique, random ass thing can be a business idea and can be something that you do for a living. And that's because the Aquarius energy. So that's why we have the AI getting super big now and all of these normal people, just like I mentioned, being able to get success, such as TikTok and people getting all these random opportunities that were average people that eventually became well known. So basically, Pluto is in Aquarius now for the next 20 years. So that's why I personally think I realized that I've been undervalued for so long in my life, and that's because Pluto was in Capricorn. And now that Pluto is in Aquarius, this is my time to shine. These next 15 to 20 years is my time to finally get, I feel, the recognition that I know I deserve. And I think this type of platform is something that I was meant to do. I don't even want to say think, because I know for a fact that this is something that I'm meant to do. I was never meant to be like every other influencer and post and be like everyone else. I've always been unique. I've always felt different. I've always never fit in with people in school. And I never really knew why, but I always had an inner knowing that I would do something big and impactful in my life. And I 100% know that the podcast is step one to immersing myself into that. Sorry for the tangent there, but I just wanted to explain that transit so you guys can see why I believe in astrology. And that's something that I do not see myself not believing or stepping away from, at least at the moment. It's something I believe, and I don't see it as something wrong personally. I know that Christians believe differently because of what the Bible says. So that's something that doesn't sit right with me. So I got on a little tangent, but let's backtrack everything now. So 2020 to 2023, that's when I started getting into the mediumship, the astrology, the full moon, the new moon, all of that good stuff. And that's also around the time when I started noticing that I wasn't able to manifest the same way that I used to. So in the beginning of 2024, which was last year around the same time, I started watching George Janko's podcast. If you don't know who George Janko is, he was someone on Logan Paul's podcast called Impulsive. On that podcast, Logan Paul was the main host, and then we had Mike Malak as the co-host, and then George Janko was the third person that was kind of like shunned and never able to really speak. And the times that he spoke, or when he mentioned God and talked about God, he was shunned, he was bullied, he was torn down, literally by his own friends in the public eye. They would do this to him. There was one time on one episode, this was with a comedian, I can't remember his name at the moment, but George got so fed up with the way he was treated by Logan Paul that he walked off the podcast. That was such a powerful moment because he had to walk away from something that was giving him stability and giving him what he thought he was meant to be doing in his life. So he actually walked away. He started his own podcast called The George Janko Show. I want to preface something before I get into why I'm talking about George's story and talk about that more in depth. So I never really liked George. George was always someone that you can tell that would try too hard to be funny and he would try too hard to fit in. I'm not saying this to hate on him. He actually mentions this about himself when he has this huge awakening, which I'm about to talk about. So basically, every time he talked about God, they would shut him down. He walked off the podcast. He started his own podcast. I didn't care to watch his podcast at first because, like I said, I didn't really like him. He tried too hard to be funny and I just didn't like him really. I randomly saw on my YouTube feed that he did a podcast with Andrew Tate. I just felt called to click it because I was very curious. And when I watched that episode, I saw how powerful George's conversations were and the way he talked to him. And it was the most amazing conversation I ever heard. And I loved how real and raw George was. And that's because he's been getting closer to God. So he would even pray before he did his podcast and say, God, I pray that you give me the strength to be able to articulate myself and talk and be with these huge people, like these huge guests that he started having ever since he left the podcast of Impulsive. He would start to get these huge guests and he would go to God about it and he would be the most powerful person. The old version of himself would have been too afraid to talk to these people and be able to have conversations like this. Through God's strength, I've been able to watch that man grow from the beginning of 2024 up until now when I'm watching him. I've been able to see God work through him and I see what God's able to do. George's testimony is the reason why I started getting curious about Christianity this past December. Let me backtrack a little bit. So the beginning of 2024, I started watching George Janko and he started having all of these powerful guests. He started becoming more powerful and he would talk about God openly. I see myself a lot in George because he's very raw, he's very vulnerable. He talks about things that no one else is talking about and he's not afraid to fix himself and work on himself in front of an audience. So if he did something where he didn't really like his character for something that he did, he talks about it on the podcast and he learns and he fixes himself and he shows people that you are capable to change and become a better person. Now, I've always considered myself spiritual at this point, and in 2024, even though I didn't care about Christianity and learning anything about that, I still listened to George. He would mention it a lot. He would talk about the Bible verses. He would have other guests where they share their testimonies, such as Bryce Crawford and many other people that he's had on the podcast. And hearing their testimonies opened my eyes, because the way I was able to see what Jesus has done to the people that he's had in his podcast, that was very inspiring too. So that's something that opened my eyes. And then also George, being able to see George transform, and God ripped him apart to make him step into his purpose and start his own podcast and have an even more powerful podcast than Logan Paul. Like I said, I stayed open-minded. I always listened to him, even if there's certain things I didn't agree with or things that I wasn't really interested in, which was all the Christianity and the Jesus talk. And then randomly in December, the beginning of December, I randomly felt a shift within myself. So all of the testimonies started building up. Around this time, I had a persistent voice in my head, which I know was God, telling me to go check out a church and to go by myself. I had this thought in the forefront of my mind every single day until I was like, fine, I'm gonna go on Google, I'm gonna see what churches are around. And I didn't really know what to look for when it comes to a church. So I asked my friend George. This is not George Janko. This is actually someone from Connecticut that I met at my gym in Connecticut. So I saw that he is Christian. So I decided that I felt comfortable to ask him about what church I should go to. And then I also asked him about what Bible I should get, because I wanted to get a Bible and just give it a chance. That being said, I took a look at the churches that were nearby, and I was trying to look for something called non-denominational. Non-denominational means that you come as you are and everyone's welcomed. So that's the vibe that I wanted. I looked at churches and I found a church called Discovery that I go to. I looked at their Instagram. They had an amazing social media presence. The fact that they had 3 locations in Orlando told me that they're a good church. So that obviously means they're a great place. So I decided to go there. I woke up one morning. I am not the type of person to wake up early, but I woke up early. I went to church on a Sunday by myself. I walked into the church and I heard them playing the worship music. It was very loud because it's early in the morning and they'd be playing that loud. But anyway, my eyes started tearing up and I felt God's presence telling me, I'm so proud of you for going. You were meant to come here today. I'm so proud of you for listening to my call and listening to my voice. And everything just felt so surreal, and I knew I was meant to be there and I was meant to stay obedient. The crazy thing about going my first time is they started a series called Jesus to Jesus, or I think it's Heaven to Heaven. And this is where they talked about when Jesus first came to earth up until his resurrection. So right now I'm on week 18 of going every single week. But basically the first day that I was there, they talked about Mary and how I'm pretty sure it was Mary's cousin Elizabeth that told her that she was going to be pregnant. She was going to be birthing the Messiah, which is Jesus. And she was so confused on why she was chosen to be able to give birth. Another reason she was confused is because she was a virgin and she was like, how is this going to happen? So she was very lost and confused on what was going on. Her faith is so strong that she stayed obedient to God. So that first time that I went to church, I learned what obedience meant. Every time I heard the word obedience thrown around when I was just spiritual and not learning about Christianity, I always thought that word was pretty intense. There's a lot of Christianity words that do sound intense, such as like sin and all of these things. And those are words that I've always stayed away from because it just seemed like too intense and like too much rules and like, I don't know. Basically, what I learned from Mary is her faith was so strong that even though she had no idea what was happening to her, she still walked into the unknown because she knew that God had her back. What I learned was God rewards those who stay obedient. But I found that so inspiring that even though Mary had no idea why she was chosen, she still stayed obedient to God. And eventually that led her to the most amazing thing of her life. So I decided to stay obedient. God rewards the people that stay obedient. Sometimes he's not going to reveal the full truth and give you clarity until you take action into the unknown. You have to jump into the fire and take action even when you feel uncomfortable. And that's when he starts revealing more and more to you. That was the most beautiful story to have on my first day at church. I decided to stay open and obedient to God, even though I had no idea why this shift was happening to me, why I randomly feel called to Jesus, and what the hell was happening. What's crazy, guys, is I used to talk down about churches and the Bible. I used to say churches are evil. They try to control people, and the people in the churches are the type to literally SA people. And what I realized is not every church is like that, and you can't talk about something unless you actually gone to a church and you experienced it for yourself. You could be SA'd by anyone. It could be your freaking father, it can be your cousin, it can be someone that you work with. just because there's stories about churches that happens to people, it doesn't mean that the church is evil. There definitely could be churches that are evil, but you just have to find the right church. So you want to make sure you feel into the church and see what they're all about. So that's a mindset shift that I had that I never thought would happen in my life. And I used to think the Bible was BS and it's not the be all be all. And that's something I'm still kind of struggling with, if it's the be all authority. But I think it has a lot of wisdom in there, and I'm open to learning about the Bible. Something I want to share with you guys is I never felt closer to God than I do now by getting closer to Jesus and learning about the stories and the origins and immersing myself fully into being open. Even though I may not believe everything I hear in the church, and there's a lot of things that still don't resonate to me, I'm still open and I'm still listening and I'm still learning, because you can't say something unless you actually took the time to learn something and immerse yourself into it so you can create your own opinion. Anyways, I've never felt closer to God in my life than I do now by knowing Jesus. There's so many things that have shifted in my life. For example, I'm the type of person that always stays to myself, especially when I'm at the gym. I don't really talk to people. If I think about a compliment and I think someone looks good, like a girl, I don't tell them. I just keep it to myself. And ever since knowing Jesus as a person, I tell myself, if you think it, say it. So anytime I have a thought about someone like, oh my God, like that girl's quads look so good, I tell myself, I count down 1, 2, 3, so 3 seconds. And I walk up to the person and I tell them the compliment, because you never know whose day you can make, and you never know the type of people you can meet. Like, what if that one person that you didn't compliment was the person that ended up helping you get your dream career, for example? Obviously, you don't want to have that intention when you're talking to people. I'm trying to give you an example of the impact when you go out of your way for people, and that's something that I never really did. Something else that I never really did before Jesus was give away money to homeless, or even look and talk to homeless people. I've always been scared of homeless people because I always think they're on like drugs, and I don't want them to like touch me in case they have like fentanyl or something scary, and I just stay away from them because I've always been scared. And ever since knowing Jesus, Jesus is the type of person, guys, where he loves you no matter what, because you're made in his image. He meets people where they're at, on the ground, the type of people that are homeless, the people that are doing sexual acts. He meets you where you're at and sees you the same as someone that is very successful, for example. Like I said before, I felt this very persistent voice many weeks on end when I saw this certain homeless guy that I always saw on my way to the gym. It was very persistent that I needed to talk to him and give him money. One day, I saw him standing at the same light, and I felt called to talk to him that day. So I opened the window and I counted to 3 seconds to make myself talk to him, because if I think it, I'm gonna say it. So I started talking to him and I started to ask how his day was and just really sit there and really listen to this guy. And he started telling me about like his neck pain and how he got jumped by someone. And then we started talking about God with each other, and it was so cool to see the faith that he had despite his situation. And I gave him $20, which is actually a lot to give someone on the street. Usually people give like a few bucks, $5 or $10, but I felt called to just give him that $20, and that's also kind of like all I had anyway in cash. Literally, guys, that is something that you would never catch me doing before I knew Jesus. There's so many other examples in my life that I do now because I know Jesus. I didn't know him literally months ago. I started knowing who he was in December. And I forgot to mention this, guys, but I actually grew up Catholic. I was too young to remember anything I learned. So I never actually knew Jesus. I've always believed in God, just like I told you, but I never knew who Jesus was. And now that I know him and I'm learning the stories every week from church, I am starting to live like him, and my life has completely changed. The past few months, I probably had a handful of fears and limiting beliefs that have held me back my whole life. And the fact that I know Jesus now, I know that he has my back and I can rely on his strength, because you can only rely on your own strength for so long. You can't solely rely on your own motivation. You have to rely on what's outside of you, which is God. He is the only person that's going to be able to give you the strength that you need. And he has gave me strength to overcome every single fear and limiting belief I've had. And like I told you guys, it's very big limiting beliefs and fears that I had that I've been able to overcome in literally a few months. My life is starting to rapidly shift and rapidly change. And I feel so much more confident and so much more peace now that I know Jesus and I have him in my life. Just like I told you guys, I'm not sharing this to push things on you. I'm sharing this to share my personal transformation and everything going on in my life. I still have no idea what God is doing to me and doing with me, but I'm just staying open. The message I want to leave you with is stay open and remain curious, because you have no idea what that's going to lead you to. I'm not just talking about like spirituality and faith and all that stuff, but literally relationships, career. Maybe there's a career that you had no idea that you would even consider, but you stayed open, you tried something new, and you remained curious, and that led you to your dream career and dream fulfillment. So that's my message for you guys. Stay open, stay curious, and stay obedient. And I promise you, when you follow that inner knowing in your heart, and you go in the fire and you go in the unknown, even when you have no idea if it's going to work out and what's going to happen and you're scared shitless, I promise you that you're going to feel so much fulfillment. You're going to have so much abundance and so much success in your life when you do that for yourself. That closes out episode 2. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this podcast. And it would mean the world to me if you guys can leave a comment and tell me which part resonated with you. I would love to hear your opinions and your thoughts and anything about you guys in the comments. So if you guys could subscribe, comment, like, share with someone, put it on your story, show that you're watching the podcast, that would mean the world to me, and tag me. And you guys can even DM me and tell me your personal stories. Also, guys, there is something that I want to do at the end of every podcast. I'm actually filming this podcast on the day that I launched the first episode of the podcast. So I can't start the segment yet because I just now, before filming this podcast, launched the first one. But basically what I want to do is I want to put a question box on Instagram every single week, and I want you guys to write something so I can give you advice. So I want you to ask anything you want, and then on the podcast, I'll be able to go on my phone, I can see what you guys entered, and then I can give you guys the best advice that I possibly can and be able to support you guys. I want to thank you guys so much for watching my podcast, and I hope you guys watch my next episode that's going to be out next week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. EST.